I think I can blame Emily Henry, the original trilogy. I know it well-ish, and I'm familiar with it. The woman's name is Audrey, so I should know what her job is. Can you see how much I checked this out? I'm like, what is the day that which we are in? There's no such thing as like not enough books, or like that didn't make sense either. Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back, or welcome, to Chapter and Converse. So today, already stuttering. Today we're gonna talk about the rest of the books that I read in June. So I did part one of the video, which I will link for you guys. Long story short, in case you missed it, I read The Decagon House Murders, I read The Night in Question, I read The Girls of Summer, and then I listened to All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby, and I listened to The Bad Guys Won by Jeff Pearlman. So, all thoughts, feelings, all of the details are in video number 1, and today we're here for video number 2. So, there was part of me that I think just thought I was gonna roll through this month and like crush a whole bunch of books. But if you have been following me, maybe, I don't even know if I talked about it too much, I've kind of abandoned audiobooks, which were my lifeline, and have leaned into a lot of podcasts lately. So I only have 4 books to talk about, but we're gonna go quality, not quantity. I'm not here to like power through books just for the sake of powering through books, and I'm not sorry that I listen to a bunch of amazing podcasts. So there is going to be, if there isn't already, an Instagram post all about those podcasts, so there's a little teaser for you guys. But let's talk books. So if you're following me on Instagram, you already would have heard me talk about this one. So the first book I want to talk about is The Quiet Tenant. This is by Clemence Michelon, and this is a serial killer thriller, but kind of with a bit of a twist in the way that it's told. So Abby from Crime by the Book actually did the publicity for this book, and she talked about it on her Instagram, and I wound up requesting an ARC of it, which I got, and then I wound up finding it early in my bookstore, which I got, and I loved this book. Like 5-star, loved this book. And I would say I went in with moderate expectations in that new to me author. So she has published a book in French. She is French originally, and this is her first thriller, so her US debut. And I very much trust Abby's recommendations, but like, you don't know what you don't know. And I was so blown away by this book. It was so flippin' good. It was so flippin' good. So of course, I'm gonna say go into it a bit on the dark side, because I feel like one of the best things about this story, and again, I didn't read too much about it. One of the beauties of an ARC is it's all a little bit vague, because like not everybody's talking about it yet. But I really enjoyed the unraveling of the story, the reveals of the characters as we got to know them. So the crux of this story is we are following, we're following Aiden Thomas. So Aiden Thomas is a single father. His wife has passed away. He has a teenage daughter. He lives in a small town in the Hudson Valley in New York, which is a little bit more than a stone's throw from where I am, but kind of in the area. I know it well-ish, and I'm familiar with it. And he is really well respected in the town. So the town is really like rallied around him after his wife has passed away. He is like, he's a good dude. People want to do good things for him. He's very well regarded in town. And he has been living in a house where he is forced to move out of the house. And the thing is, he has had this woman chained up in the shed out back for the last 5 years, and moving house means having to move her with him. So that's what Aiden has to do. But what's even more interesting about how the story unfolds is we get 3 different points of view from this story. So we get his daughter Cecilia, we get Rachel, who is the woman he has had imprisoned in the shed behind his house for the last 5 years. And then we get a woman named Emily, who is a local restaurant owner. It's her family's restaurant. She's lived here her whole life. She has known Aiden kind of from a distance her whole life and had a bit of a crush on him when she was a teenager. And now as an adult, she has a little bit more than a crush on him, and she's interested in pursuing him. So we get to see him through these 3 different women's perspectives. And I said it before and I'll say it again, I loved this book. It is dark, it is creepy, it is slow burn in some parts. Again, it's like very it's like one of those books that is both slow, but keeps you on the edge of your seat and keeps you flipping pages. So I really enjoyed how the story unfold. I'm like really trying to catch my words here. I just thought it was so well done. I really enjoyed it. And I saw, this could have been, I don't know, a couple of days ago maybe, Jordy from Jordy's Book Club, who is one of my favorite people on Instagram, pitched this as like, if you, like, what if Luke Danes from Gilmore Girls was a serial killer? And I was like, that's it. That's it. So it's not like a quirky Stars Hollow kind of a town, but it's very much that thing where you've got this guy who is like very well regarded and nobody knows what's going on behind closed doors. So I highly recommend this book. It is so good. It is, I just like slowly lived in this book. And I feel like that's something else I did the second half of June. I'm like, what is the day that which we are in? The second half of June, with the exception of one book, is I really slowly enjoyed the books I was reading. And I loved it. Loved it. Loved it. Okay, so book number 2. I finally read The It Girl by Ruth Ware. So this is her book that came out in 2022. I promised myself I would read this before 0 Days came out, and I finished this probably a few days before 0 Days came out. And I don't know why. Well, I know one reason I know why. This is her dark academia book. So we are in Oxford. We have dual timelines. We know out of the gate that it is a group of friends who meet freshman year at Oxford, and one of the girls in the group is murdered. And we fast forward 10 years later, and the man who was arrested for her murder is in prison and dies in prison, not execution, but dies in prison. And the reality starts to sort of sink in that he may not have been responsible for the murder. So did the wrong person go to jail, and what really happened that night? So very dark academia. And this was definitely on my the list I keep referring to from last year, that I made a whole bunch of plans and then I just didn't read anything. So I think I kind of psyched myself out a lot for dark academia books, coupled with the fact that somewhere in my brain, and I don't know where, and after the fact I realized that I believe I am quite wrong in this, I was convinced that there were, like, people weren't loving this book, and I psyched myself out. But in hindsight, I think it was a different book, not of hers, from a whole different author. But anyway, I loved it. I'm a huge Ruth Ware fan, with the exception of 0 Days, because it just came out. I have read all of her books. I discovered her. She came on my radar when In a Dark, Dark Wood came out. So I have followed her in chronological order as she has released her books. And I really, really enjoyed this book. I would say probably one of my favorites of hers. In a Dark, Dark Wood is still my favorite. I need to reread it. Not that I need to like prove to myself it's still my favorite, but it's my favorite. But this one has just great friendship vibes, sort of the secrets and lies. And April is the quote unquote it girl, and she is the one who winds up getting murdered. And Hannah is our main character who we're following. And the other hitch in this book is Hannah is the one who accused the accused of murdering April. So she's carrying a lot of guilt when stories start to come out that maybe he wasn't actually the person who committed the murder. So we see the past tense of them meeting, everything leading up to April's murder. I was going to say death, her murder. And then we see present tense, what's going on in Hannah's life. So I really enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed meeting them in the past. I just love, you know, not trusting people, not quite sure what's going on here. And I was just a huge fan of it. I really enjoy her writing. Again, I enjoyed it in a very slow but page-turny way. Like I read it in 4 days. I'm looking at my notes here. And I wound up doing actually a combination of physically reading it and then listening to the audiobook. This was before the weather turned so awful here that you couldn't go outside for a walk. So Imogen Church is the audiobook reader, and I was totally in for it. So this was one of those books where I just like wanted to be in it, and I thought it was great. I really, really did. So I always love a dual timeline. I love sort of that self-doubt that was going through Hannah's mind. I always love that complicated friend group. It very much reminded me of In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead, in that same sense of you have this group of friends who are tied through this one terrible thing that happened. They already have complicated relationships, and then we get to see where people are in the present day and how what happened back at Oxford has rippled through and impacted all of their lives. So if you are a Ruth Ware fan and haven't yet read this one, I do highly recommend it. And if you haven't read her yet, I feel like this would kind of go into one of the sort of universal books if you're like looking for a way in with Ruth Ware. So I was totally satisfied with this. I definitely fell for some red herrings. And it was like one of these books where I wasn't trying to solve it, but I like being with Hannah as she is starting to question things and being sort of in the detective shoes with her. So we only know what she knows, and I always love that in a mystery, that we are just in the same boat that our protagonist is in, and I thought it was great. So I have heard that 0 Days takes a bit of a turn for Ruth Ware and is a bit more high-octane thriller, so we will see if it's a departure or not. Stay tuned for that when I do read it, but in the meantime, like I said, this one's great. So huge fan. Again, books find you when they're supposed to, so I don't know what was up with me last year, but I'm glad I finally read it. The next book I have is also an ARC, and I talked about this in my July new releases, and I hadn't yet received the ARC of it, so it's like an e-ARC from NetGalley, but it's Whisper by Brian Dearborn. So this is a debut thriller, kind of leaning more into like a slasher horror type of a vibe than just like a straight up thriller. So I had heard about this via Dennis from Scared Straight Reads and Gare from Gare Indeed Reads on Instagram. And this is a self-published debut novel. So I had it kind of like marked on my wish list. I saw it was coming out on Kindle, and then I saw somebody had an ARC of it, and it didn't even occur to me that a self-published book might be on NetGalley. So I wound up going on NetGalley and grabbing it, and then I like binged through it. So this was like the bingeable book that I had. And I would say this is like, if you're a fan of kind of like the 90s slasher films, the I Know What You Did Last Summer, the Scream franchise, like that, urban legend, like that kind of era of like teen slasher films, this one would very much be up your alley. So it definitely, Brian Dearborn himself, is like a huge fan of slashers. You can see his love of it. You can see his inspiration in it. There also is a great author's note at the end about what inspired him to kind of rediscover his love of writing and what inspired him to actually like write the book, which I always love. So I will save that for you guys to read it if you decide to read this book. Definitely read the author's note. But this has kind of like all of that creepy, big bad slasher movie energy behind it. And I read it really, really quickly. So in this one, we are following a girl named Madison and her best friend, Amy. So her best friend from growing up was murdered in Westport, Connecticut. So Madison lives in San Diego, and we get to see this kind of like from an all perspective standpoint. And it is very clear from the beginning that Madison is the quote unquote one to thank for all the bad things that are going on. So Madison does wind up returning to Westport. There is a lot of question about what happened to her best friend, Amy. Obviously she was murdered. They don't know who did it. And as Madison returns to San Diego, she starts to realize that somebody is out for her. So it just becomes very like dark and creepy and slashery. So there are definitely some scenes that are of the bloody horror genre. So if that's not your thing, maybe not your thing, but there are a couple images that definitely stayed with me. And I did love that there is an element where they want, not like an element, but there's a storyline where they wind up going to Chatham on Cape Cod, which is where we used to go when we went to Cape Cod when I was growing up. So I don't know that I've ever seen a book where people are hanging out in Chatham. So I did actually love that, which has nothing to do with the storyline other than I love when things like are something you can connect to. So again, it's just sort of like very slashery horror-y. I think you will see some allusions to things in movies if you're familiar with the genre that you will know. I will say I wish some of the scenes had a bit more tension to them. Like one of my favorite Scream scenes is the original opening, obviously. And in Scream 2, the Dewey Gale sound booth sequence, I think is one of the best scenes. And also the Parker Posey in Scream 3. And I have seen 4, 5, and 6, but like the original trilogy. And I love that tension, that build, that like all of that goes into it, rather than just sort of like a one and done kind of a situation. So I wish some of the scenes had been a bit more drawn out, giving me some more tension. But if you're looking for just something to like gobble up and binge, this would be a book for you. And again, you have to be a lover of the slasher genre to, I think, like sink your teeth into this one. So glad I read it. Curious what else he's going to do next, and grateful to get the arc of it. So that was pretty cool. And then the last book I read is the only non-thriller, and I don't know when. I think I can blame Emily Henry, when my love of romance came back on the scene. So I read How to Fake It in Hollywood by Ava Wilder. So I almost gave something away. So long story short, Ashley Winstead recommended this book on a podcast I was listening to. And she has, as of now, it's come out, but she was having a new book coming out called Will They or Won't They? And Ashley Winstead was talking about how much this book stuck with her and how she was still like all about Gray and Ethan, and she totally loved this book. And you guys know I love all things Ashley Winstead, but I totally love her rom-coms. And I was like, oh, I need to check this out. Can you see how much I checked this out? This book was so freaking good. And not that I didn't think it would be, but sometimes you just don't know, because romance is not always usually my go-to. But I devoured this book like it was a thriller. Like, I read it pretty quickly. Didn't I say at the beginning of this, I was like, I didn't read anything quickly. I was slow reading. I actually read this really quickly. So I loved everything about this book. This gives me the wit, the smarts, the like well-placed banter, the right amount of steam. Doors open in this one, so if that's not for you, just know door is kicked wide open in this book. And it is like some weightiness to it. There is some darkness to it, but it is such a well done book. And these characters are characters that I would read over and over and over again. I would follow their story wherever it takes them, and I loved it. So in this one we are following, this is a fake dating book. I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning. So we are following two actors in Hollywood. So Gray she's 28. She was part of a TV show, became famous on that show, but ever since then, her movie career hasn't quite skyrocketed. So she's sort of been circling the Hollywood scene, is up for possibly being in like a Hunger Games-esque type of a movie, but her star hasn't really risen. So her PR team feels like she could use a little bit of a boost. And her agent, I'm trying to think, her agent or her PR team? The woman's name is Audrey, so I should know what her job is. Okay, so Renata is her agent, Audrey is the PR team. So she shares a PR agent with this very well-known Hollywood actor who I believe, I don't know if this is me putting it out there or if this is actually a thing, a little bit modeled after Ben Affleck perhaps. So he is, I think like 38, 39. He's like 10, 11 years older than her. And Ethan has had an incredible career. He's won an Oscar, but for the last 5 years or so, he just wants to be left alone, and he has dropped out of the scene. And he's kind of in need of a comeback. So their PR team decides to pair them together because they can help each other out, use each other for leverage, and Ethan can have his comeback and Gray's star can rise, and like everybody wins. So of course it's never going to be that easy. And they kind of both reluctantly enter into this. They both see the value of what they can gain out of this. And in typical rom-com fake dating fashion, shenanigans ensue. But what I said like earlier, there is some weightiness to this, which I really enjoyed. And I liked the peel back behind the curtain, sort of the inside baseball of Hollywood. But ultimately, the writing, the banter and connection between these two, I love that it's not quite enemies to lovers, but like there's definitely a rub between them. And again, neither of them are super jazzed about this, but they recognize the benefit in doing this. And I really loved the messy, complicated baggage they both brought to the table. I loved how strong of a character Gray was. I loved so much about their relationship. And like, there's so much stuff that would contain spoilers and I just don't want to do that. But I really liked how things were worked out between them, how things were introduced between them, the different character sort of flaws and strengths that they each had. And again, the kick door open steam. It was great. It was totally great. But it takes us from Hollywood to New York City, and there's a great supporting cast of characters in this. And I just thought it was so well done. Like, I was blown away by how much I loved this. And again, kind of like with the Quiet Tenant, I went in with like moderate expectations. I trust Ashley Winstead to the end of the earth. But I was really, really blown away by this. So I think if you like Emily Henry, if you like Ashley Winstead's rom-coms, this is definitely worth checking out. So I am going to be reading her next one. I also already picked it up. Stay tuned for a book haul. That was also out early in my bookstore, which I was super happy about. But I have just like sunk my teeth into romances lately, and I've been loving them so much. So I am going to blame every podcast I've been listening to, because all of the book recommendations I've been getting, a lot of them have been across the board. And I have discovered so many new to me authors, and I'm really excited about it. And something else I will say, so I am really trying to focus, get my butt in the chair, get my second draft done. I've talked about this in another video. I want to have a second draft done by mid-October so I can enter NaNoWriMo clean. What I'm going to do for NaNoWriMo is TBD, but I have been not diligent about working on my second draft. So one of my many procrastination tasks is obviously reading. But one of the things that I have always struggled with when I'm writing is writing a thriller and reading thrillers definitely complicates my mind. So there are certain types of thrillers I can read that don't impact me because it's not what I'm writing, but a lot of, not that I'm like writing a Ruth Ware, writing an Ashley Winstead. I'm not that much of a person that I'm gonna like make that kind of a statement, but that type of thriller is the type of thriller I'm writing. So it's very hard for me to read those books and not worry that I'm going to get kind of pulled in and like pull stuff out in an unintentional way. And also it does mess with me a little bit in the sense where it makes me feel like I am the worst writer in the entire world. So the antidote to that is reading books that are nothing like what I'm writing, which in this case turned out to be romance. So I'm probably gonna keep leaning into the romance of it all. And I do have plans to lean into the audiobooks again. But anyway, How to Fake It in Hollywood. If you like a fake dating trope, it's just so good. I just can't explain it. There's some laugh out loud funny lines in this. Thinking of one in particular. And I just loved so much about it. But ultimately, it's also just a story about personal strength and overcoming hard things and doing the hard things and standing up for yourself. And I think sort of that reassessment, I keep coming back to this, taking stock in your life, reassessing where you're at, going after what you want, chasing your dreams. And I think how self-doubt can come in and how it's very easy to get brought down by things and to be discouraged by things. But I also love that Ava Wilder's characters, again, are so profoundly human. They are messy, they mess up. They are not just like up all the time. Things aren't perfect, things aren't shiny. And even when things look shiny, it doesn't mean they are shiny. So again, kind of pulling away that curtain, what's real, what's not. And I do love sort of the messing with the, you know, public persona versus what's going on behind closed doors, what's the real story. And I just kind of love that whole, how fake media really is, and don't trust what you see, and what you see is not always what you're getting. So that manipulation of the media and how they leverage it, and I just thought it was great. And I also felt like there was so much real stuff in here, in the sense that like there are things that are familiar, like, is he supposed to be Ben Affleck? I don't really know. But there were parts of him that reminded me of Ben Affleck and his story with like Matt Damon and the Oscar and, you know, everything that they did when they were younger. And I definitely pictured a 30-something Ben Affleck as Ethan, and I'm not mad about that. So there you go. But I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. And I will keep you guys posted on her next one. But that is where we're at. So 9 books for the month of June. By no means anything to like, you know, wag a finger at. And I'm doing okay in July. So I've already finished one book. I read The Daydreams by Laura Henkin. Again, if you follow me on Instagram, you'd already know that by now. And I'm just kind of going with what works for me. So again, stay tuned for the podcast roundup. And I don't know, like audiobooks just haven't appealed to me. It's been the literal dog days of summer now, mixed with like the bad air quality that keeps boomeranging back to us. So I have not been able to get out and walk, which has definitely impacted my audiobook game, but we're just gonna see what happens. So I really should be writing. So on that note, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna go work on my book. But let me know, have you guys read any of these romance recommendations? I may have picked up a whole bunch. And let me know what you think about what you're reading. Like I said, what's your favorite book of the month? And yeah, we'll talk down below. So thanks for being here, you guys. The ending always gets weird. I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.